Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manicherian, former NFL scout and currently of Sports Info Solutions, joined by Aaron Schatz of Football Outsiders, and a very special guest today, Mike Tanier of Bleacher Report. If you don't have it already, download the Bleacher Report app. You'll need it during March Madness, and we've got a different kind of March Madness today. Mike's got a little that he wants to get off his chest, and I don't think Twitter is the place for nuance, where I feel like this podcast might be a little bit more of a nuanced place where we can talk this out. But I'll just start it out. What's the deal, man? Why are you attacking us analytics folks?
Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Tanier, Moneyball heretic.
That's me, the Martin Luther of Moneyball. And I'm going to nail my 97 theses. That's theses, TH to the wall here. A couple of things happened last week, or came to my attention last week. One was handing an analytics award to John Gruden, who kind of flew by the seat of his pants and got rid of a guy, in part because the owner was mad at him. What have we become that this is like the standard bearer for what analytics means, especially in football and in sports in general? That was one thing. The second thing that happened, of course, is the Odell Beckham trade. And in the wake of the Odell Beckham trade, one of the hot takes is the people I like to call Sashi-farians, the people who have created a martyrdom cult around Sashi Brown, are talking about what a great validation this was for tanking, and what a great validation this was for the way Sashi Brown ran the Browns 3 years ago or whatever that was. And again, I had another out-of-body experience. Like, is this what you started Football Outsiders for? Is this what we worked for in the mid-2000s? Is this what this is all about? That what we boiled down to is tanking on purpose and saying, you traded a guy for draft picks even though he was a guy you needed, and et cetera. Trading for draft picks is good. Is that all that this is becoming? And if so, I mean, why? Why is that the perception now for analytics?
I will say it's interesting because it seems a little bit like some of the analytical talk on Twitter about these two trades is sort of antithetical to each other. Mm-hmm. If it's good to trade Khalil Mack for 2 first-round picks, then why is it not good to trade Odell Beckham for effectively 2 first-round picks and a third? Now, obviously, the big asterisk on that is because Khalil Mack you had to sign to a colossal new deal, whereas Odell Beckham comes without the charge of his signing bonus, and his salary is much more reasonable when you're only paying his salary and you're not paying the signing bonus.
Nuance. There's a difference between
the two trades.
Yeah.
But I go back to something when we were talking about the Odell Beckham trade on this show last week. I said no one ever went broke paying the best player in the game. Right? Like, the point of saving money on all of the good players and the mediocre players and the average players is so you can pay big money to the best players that you can get. And Khalil Mack and Odell Beckham both qualify as being among the 3 or 4 best players at very important positions, not quarterback positions. But this isn't like analytics celebrating getting rid of a running back for 2 first-round picks. These are passing game guys, right? The pass rusher is probably the most important player on the defense at this point.
Yeah, and when we talk about nuance, you say, the Raiders are a rebuilding team, all right? So, and they've got a guy who wants a colossal contract. So they wind up engineering this trade, and 2 first-round picks help you rebuild, et cetera, et cetera. But, if we're going to talk about analytics as something besides the diner menu here are the bullet points, and here are the bullet points. You trade guys for draft capital, and draft capital is good. This kind of like stereotypical Moneyball approach. Different teams are in different places in their development cycle. You could argue maybe the Raiders were in that place because they had a new head coach and they were doing they were adding veterans. Forget that for a second, but like there might have been some logic to it. It's also a good trade for a team like the Bears who look around at themselves and say, this is going to propel us into the next level.
Evaluating the quarterback correctly.
Right. Well, and they say we have a quarterback that's going to get us to this level. We build an offense around it, structurally making a defense that puts us over the top. This is an elite player. We do that. So it's a trade that had logic on both sides. I would categorize that as that. But when Sloan puts this trade out there as like some victory for the Raiders, it sounds like, forget what you see on the field, that the Bears were this team that was like special to watch and came within a missed field goal going to the next level of the playoffs and is now like considered one of the playoff teams for next year and all this. Forget all that. Also forget the fact that John Gruden, tends to speak anti-analytically and filled his roster with expensive veterans and clearly was in the middle of having this sort of like personality conflict with the agent, and so was Mark Davis and with McKenzie, and that was all a factor. Forget all that. Hey, here's a guy who got traded for a lot of draft picks. That's what we stand for. Now, I know we don't stand for that. I don't think we stand for that. But there's a way that analytics is now being talked about in the media, on Twitter, just casually when I wind up going on radio shows and stuff like that. And that's what it boils down to. This means tanking. This means getting rid of your guys. That's what you're advocating. And I get very concerned when it comes to that. And again, I think that comes in a lot when we start talking about the Browns. Not so much whether Odell Beckham trade was a good trade or a bad trade, but whether this is some exemplar of some long-range plan that was made 3 years ago, that like the logic behind, drafting Joe Peppers was, and someday Dave Gettleman's going to go insane and we're going to be able to trade him and 2 other picks for a guy. That's not good logic, and it's not really a good representation of, I think, what we try to be about.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different sides of it, but I will kind of take you on in terms of the process versus outcome, because I do think that if the process is sound, I do believe in that. But I think that you accurately make a point that we might not just – we look at tanking and we think that equals analytics and we think that equals good process, and that's not necessarily true. I think, honestly, Khalil Mack trade is probably going to end up being good for both teams in the way that it worked out. And I think that the rate – and that can happen if you have teams that are at different cycles in their development. Like I think we'd all agree that these teams are. So it makes sense there. When you're in your window, you need to spend to the maximum. You can spend 100%, whereas when you're outside of your window, you can spend down to the 90%, and you can kick money forward from year to year. And yes, there's a purpose to accumulating future value. But I kind of want to take you on, because I do think that if you look at Sashi, for example, to defend Sashi, he accumulated a lot of the assets that Dorsey has had to play with. So I know that maybe it wasn't the greatest first-round pick a couple years ago. That said, it was an asset that he had to work with in terms of these trades. And when you've got buku assets, it's a lot easier to find some idiot GM who's willing to trade for one of them and take them off your hands for Odell Beckham. And then the Odell, there is so we talk about surplus value. If you can get a great player, you're going to have to overpay for him in terms of surplus value. Odell Beckham's the rare exception to that right now. He's a guy that you're paying $15 million unguaranteed a year to, and on the open market, he would be worth $20 million. So there's by definition, there's surplus value with a player like that you by definition don't have with Khalil Mack. So again, kind of turning the dial a little bit.
Thing I will point out about Khalil Mack, the Khalil Mack trade and the idea that it was a good trade for both teams is not just where each team was in its development cycle, but where each team was with its quarterback. I do think that it's true that it would have been very difficult for the Raiders to be paying exorbitant money for, frankly, a mediocre quarterback, and then also pay the highest, or after Aaron Donald, the second highest defensive salary in the league, whereas the Bears have the advantage, like the Rams do, of having a quarterback still on a rookie salary to fit Khalil Mack into their cap. It's going to be a lot harder to fit Khalil Mack into the cap once they have to pay Trubisky like a veteran.
Well, yeah, but that's two years down the line, 3 years down the line. You're creating a window here.
Right. So each of these teams is in a different place. Now, I think that that's a good argument for trade good for both teams. I don't think that's a good argument for this was the best analytical move made by any team over the last year. And I do think you also have to look at it a little bit. It wasn't an analytical move. It was a Mark Davis doesn't like Khalil Mack move. And that is just, by all the stuff that Gruden has said about analytics, and by the fact that if you are quote unquote tanking, you don't go out and sign large contracts for guys like Jordy Nelson.
So to defend Gruden a little bit now, Gruden did also make the Amari Cooper trade. And I think, at the time we looked at that and how much it improved the Cowboys. And again, another kind of like win-win trade.
That's another win-win trade. Yes.
But I really think that getting that first rounder for Amari Cooper, I think that's a big steal. That was kind of a coup for them where that was at, because that was an example of a player that probably needed a change of scenery. And they were able to recoup some real value there for a year and a half of him being under contract. So I like that one too, in terms of what just the asset value when you're in year one of a 10-year plan.
I do think also, though, not only I think Mike is right when he says that it's tough that there are some people in the general media who have reduced analytics now to trade veterans for first-round picks. I also think that not every time that you trade a veteran for a first-round pick, not only is analytics not just trade veterans for first-round picks, but trade veterans for first-round picks is not necessarily analytics. In this case, I think it was, we have this wide receiver who is not performing, who needs a change of scenery, and who needs a gigantic raise. Yeah. Let's go get a first-round pick. Again, there's no indication that they're doing analytics in Oakland. They fired the analytics guy, George Lee, when they took over the franchise.
Right. And George is brilliant. I've had the opportunity to know him a little bit personally, and it's hard to imagine why a team would ever do that with somebody like that. So I think we agree.
Props quickly to, I believe, Indianapolis, which then picked him up.
So one thing that I would kind of mention here is we look at the different definition, obviously, and I say obviously, but I think, Mike, the part that we get all angry about, and I think that you expressed this week on Twitter, tanking is not analytics. Tanking is not, and tanking is tanking. Analytics existed a long time before tanking became a thing. And just because you're an analyst doesn't mean that you're okay with the idea of tanking or you're in favor of it. In fact, I think analytics should be where we look to solve the tanking problem that's happening in sports. I think that there are clever solutions that analysts can bring to the table to try to get this out of sports.
And I don't know about the NBA enough to understand that, even though I'm based in Philadelphia here. I don't get all the ramifications of that. Baseball is its own little world. In football, tanking is a terrible strategy. It doesn't work.
Right.
It does not work. And I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it's like, well, if the Dolphins are tanking, why do they get Ryan Fitzpatrick? Why don't they go out there and just, run the Wildcat and hand off? There's obvious logical reasons why you shouldn't do that, can't do that. It's a terrible strategy for a variety of reasons in the NFL. But they get conflated, and that gets conflated with Moneyball, and it gets conflated with analytics, and it gets done sometimes by people who know better. But it also gets done by people who claim to sort of be coming and wearing the hat of analytics. Right? And I don't know who these people are sometimes, and it's like, well, I'm coming here, I'm going to explain Moneyball to you because I have a podcast somewhere or whatever, and I have no idea who they are. But it's like, it becomes this sort of, this is a flavor. This is a flavor of being a sports fan, and it's like, I'm into this whole strategy. We're going to tank for 3 years, tank for 4 years, whatever. And the stats back this up, and I'm part of this group of people who are the analytics people. And I hear that, and I get very, very nervous, very uncomfortable. And the people who do the work in the field, and that's you guys. I don't really do any work in the field anymore. You guys have to, I think, should come back against that perception in the media a little more. And again, that's not the onus on you guys or anything like that. But when somebody like Sloan turns around and says, hey, you know what analytics is about this year? It's about how great it is to get rid of Khalil Mack. That's a big problem. That's a big problem in the industry or in the movement, et cetera. And it's something that, I want to, when I'm writing my things, I want to educate. No, the Dolphins are not tanking because they're shedding salary. That's rebuilding. It's been around in sports for football for 80 years or whatever like that. They're not trying to lose on purpose. The goal is not to get Tua. That's not a goal that you should pursue 1 year, 2 years away. All these things, and then I'll say these things, and then the person coming back having the argument with me is like quoting Football Outsiders Almanac back at me. Quoting us back at me, like, well, I'm part of this group of people who thinks this. It's like, really? That's no, I didn't see you in church, whatever. And that's where. And that's where it gets very weird, and that's why I get concerned, because do we want acceptance? Do we want these ideas to become more mainstream, become more accepted to teams, or do we want to be the guys playing Dungeons and Dragons in the basement like the Stranger Things kids who are like, oh, we're not jealous of the prom king or whatever, we're down here doing our own thing. That's what it becomes if we aren't careful.
You hate bad analytics. Bad analytics are the worst thing for us.
I will say, I don't know if it's quite true that tanking doesn't work. I think that what is true is what you sort of convinced me of when we co-wrote the Cleveland Browns chapter last year, which is rebuilding, and you can call it tanking if you want to. Rebuilding in the NFL needs to be a 1-year process, because all these great rookies that you're drafting with all these draft picks, you get them for 4 years and that's it. You don't have time to go through a 3-year rebuild in the NFL. You get 1 year to do it. And one of the things about Cleveland is I do think that Sashi Brown deserves some credit for helping to get all the tools that John Dorsey has then seemingly used so well. We'll see whether they make the playoffs this year. But the problem was that their rebuild took forever, and that even with Sashi, that it was 2 years of not 4-12, but 2 years of 0-16 and 1-15, rather than what a rebuild really should be, which is like 1 year of that, and then a year of like 6-10, and then you have to have. One thing that I know you always argue for, Mike, is you've got to have some good players around, or else you're never going to be able to scout the young players that you're trying to decide on if they're only playing with other young players and with other undrafted, if you're filling the holes in your lineup with undrafted 22-year-old kids, you're never going to be able to really properly scout your drafted 22-year-old kids.
So I think this comes back to on the field. I think that this football is a little bit of a different sport. It is the ultimate team sport. It's 11 on 11. It involves violence and all this kind of stuff. And I think that there's something to be said for when you try to build a winning team culture, that it takes time, that it's a building process, that you can't expect to have the wrong players in, snap your fingers with the right players in. It's not like the Houston Astros where, okay, everybody's hitting 330. Who cares what they hit last year? This is something that takes building. You have to build. Drew Brees can't work with a receiver for one game and just be on the same page with him just like that. It takes at least 2 seasons to get really the full range of that comfort with one another for these players. And that's true in football. It's just blatantly true that you have to build the culture. You have to build all of these things. And
it's not just the culture. It's the actual level of talent around you, where it's not like, okay, they don't have chemistry with each other. There's a left tackle that will get Drew Brees killed. You look at Josh Rosen and the Cardinals last year. There's an offensive line so bad, you cannot evaluate the rest of your offense because the ball has to be out in a quarter of a second. The snap's coming at the guy's knees. The only guy to throw to is 34 years old, etc. You have, it's like a blank slate at the end of the 1 year. I think there was some of that in Cleveland where you would look around and say, I don't know how good this guy is because this guy's good. I don't know how good this guy is because this guy's bad. And a lot of those guys are gone now and they didn't develop. It's not just about, well, you have to have this sort of chemistry and things like that. The one guy has to be good enough to help the other. Don't need that in baseball. The batter's the batter. I know, he needs protection behind him, whatever. The batter's the batter. In basketball, you know what Zion is. He's going to go out there and be obviously a level of talent. It's not that way in football, and that's why you need to create a structure. I mean, Dave Gettleman said you can rebuild while compete while rebuilding. Of course, this Gettleman, he sounds like a ninny right now. He's performing like a ninny right now. It makes it the Seahawks just did it. The Eagles did it 2 years ago. You do it that way, and you can do it that way. And a lot of the principles of analytics say it's sound to do it that way. And that's what I want to see. That's what I would love to hear Sloan, give some kind of like presentation to. Here's something about the things Bill Belichick did to acquire all of these guys to surround Tom Brady at his age, and like there's no first round picks or whatever. Something like that as the message coming out of that. That would be the thing I would have been excited to hear, or something like that. Not, oh, let's go back to the Khalil Mack trade and declare. And the other thing is declaring victory based on like optics. Like you said, we need to see. Maybe in a couple of years, it's like, oh, look, there's first round picks or the Raiders are a playoff team, whatever. We need to wait and see. We can't declare victory based on the thought experiment of this look good on paper.
If you think about it, a better analytical deal might have been trading a 6th round pick for a 7th round pick and Jason McCourty.
Right.
They dropped a few places in the draft, which is basically meaningless, and they picked up a starting cornerback with a reasonable salary. That's a pretty good analytical deal.
Starting cornerback who for some reason couldn't cut it with the Browns and for some reason couldn't cut it with the Titans, 2 teams that can't necessarily give away talent all the time.
But who always had strong cornerback charting numbers, if you want analytics, right? McCourty always had strong charting numbers.
Right. And look at that deal. Look at the Trent Brown deal where you get a guy for 1 year in exchange for swapping 3rd round picks with 4th round picks. He plays left tackle at a pretty high level. Yeah, Tom Brady has a lot to do with that, but you still get this guy. You get this value. Those are the things that look at. And we're at the time of the year right now where all of a sudden, all the low signings where you got these free agents signing 1 year, $5 billion, and this does not amount to anything. This is the place where I think a lot of teams are going to go out there and they're going to find some kind of bargain, some kind of guy who's 27 years old. And it's like, oh, well, he's an older veteran, et cetera. He fits the system. He comes in. He helps the team make the playoffs. Maybe he plays a part in the Super Bowl roster. This is the stuff that I think is interesting right now. And, this could be part of the message of analytics. But, again, there's people out there in the name of analytics who come up with this crazy stuff.
So one thing I want to say, because Aaron, you said before, whether you want to call it tanking or whether you want to call it rebuilding, I want to distinguish, and I think we can all agree on this. tanking is trying to lose. Tanking is setting up your team to not win many games to increase your draft position. And we don't think that that is a very good strategy in the NFL. And how could it be? There's so much injury risk. You don't see that much difference between the draft positioning regardless. That's why the Patriots are able to compete every year. In basketball, you need to have a top 2-3 pick in order to get your Zion or whoever else like that. Rebuilding has been around forever. And when I was growing up in the 90s, we used to call it a one-year rebuild. There was the only type of rebuild. We're having a rebuilding season. This is our rebuilding season, and then we're on to the next thing. We would say it's a rebuilding season. So it was inherently a one-year rebuild, and that's something that's just, okay, we've maxed out our books. We're going to take 1 year. We're going to clear everything out. We're going to get much younger. We're going to take our licks that are going to come, but we're going to be trying to build starting right now as soon as we clear all that off the books. Not we're going to kick it down and try to actively be 1-15 this year so that we have the first pick in the draft. Let's be in favor of a rebuilding season, which is just using your brain. It's not even Moneyball at that point. It's just being thoughtful about how you're spending your resources, like people have been doing since the beginning of time. And tanking is something else. And I'm with you guys. I don't like tanking in football. I don't think it's something that helps with any sort of team building.
Let's at least, I will say, give Cleveland a little bit of credit. I don't think the goal was to go 0-16. I think that some of that is based on a little bit of bad luck, and a lot of it is based on Hugh Jackson.
Right. Well, that's the credit, and that's and the
deficit. Yeah, because they're the ones who hired Hugh Jackson in the first place. Yes.
If they had just squeaked it out at 4-12 for a couple of years, they might not have had to, see somebody else see the vision through.
Have Myles Garrett and Baker Mayfield either. There's a double-edged sword.
Right. It's good to go on at 15 because you can pick up the number 1 pick in the draft, but.
Yeah, you can't have it both ways where it's like, all this draft capital is so high. Yes, it's because you stunk that at that level. So it kind of becomes this little bit of a circular argument there, which was one of the many reasons why, as people read in last year's Football Outsiders Almanac, I can be very, very critical of what the Browns did.
I know they got the first pick and all that kind of stuff. I think it has much more to do with having many draft picks than it does necessarily like the individual spot that they were picking, although I can't argue with that. They did have 2 number 1 guys that have definitely panned out.
I still don't criticize them for all the times that they traded down, though. I mean, we argue about the Carson Wentz trade, gets argued about a lot, but where the Browns were at that point in their development, the fact is he would have come into a bad situation with them. They needed more picks. I think that he was a very risky pick coming out of Division I AA. I think that trade down was wise. Trading down and accumulating picks is a good thing. The fact is that most of the best teams that we consider analytical do a lot of trading down and accumulating picks. The Patriots do it. The Packers did it during all the Ted Thompson years. But you don't have to tank or even rebuild to trade down and accumulate picks. The Patriots keep doing it, and the Packers did it during the Ted Thompson years while they were competitive teams. They still traded down because we know that one thing that analytics does teach is that you want as many lottery tickets as possible, that while the better lottery tickets are better, they're not so much better that you don't just want more of them. And it is good, to trade down. Usually a lower first and a second is better than a higher first, that kind of thing.
I hate that lottery ticket. I recognize that that's the lottery ticket. That mentality is how you wind up accumulating all this draft capital and spending it on Corey Coleman and Deshaun Kaiser and things like that.
No, see, that's okay. So that's something that we definitely do disagree on. So I think that if you look at the average value of picks throughout the draft and you look at the history of drafting and that nobody really drafts better or worse than the rest of the league, everybody kind of stinks at it. I think that you want to get as many top 100 players as possible, and then you want to get as many total draft picks as possible. And when you look at roster construction around the league, it's hard to really disagree with that. The teams that have accumulated more picks have better rosters right now.
Get as many picks as possible, but I will agree with you when you said top 100, right? When you get down into the 6th and 7th round, those picks are not much different.
Different level of value, for sure.
Drafted free agents, so you don't want to accumulate a bunch of 7th rounders, right? But I think this is one where Matt and I disagree with you, Mike, because this is one where I think process wins out over results, because you want to have the best results possible. but it's difficult to predict that you're going to have the best results possible. So the one thing you can control is the process and getting as many bites of the apple as possible. I mean, they made those bad picks, but they also made good picks like Larry Ogunjobi and Denzel Ward.
They didn't make the Denzel Ward pick. That was
that was Dorsey, right? But I mean, the Browns.
We're double counting again. I really, if you look at the amount of capital and then the amount of players who aren't even on the roster anymore, it's a pretty shocking load of very suspect picks. And again, it's like, well, is it all lottery? Obviously, it's much more random than we think it is. That the amount of effort going into like the draft may not come up with the results you want. Is that mentality of the lottery just going to make you say, well, then we can kind of grab guys? I'm not saying that's what happened there, but that's going to lead you into the assumption that, well, these are just top 100 guys. Grab them. Maybe for whatever reason we took these guys and we overrated them for a couple of reasons.
Right, but that's bad scouting. That's not something wrong with trading down. That's that they had bad scouting.
No, but it's part of the general managerial process. Okay, trading down, that's a smart move. I liked the Carson Wentz trade when it happened. I was suspect about it for the Eagles moving up at that point. Okay, and then you've got in these guys, and I'm going to admit to you right now, because some nitwit came after me on Twitter, but hey, you gave Corey Coleman an A grade, when he got drafted. And it's like, yeah, I'm a columnist who does draft grades off the top of my head on the Thursday night. I scouted the guy. And it's like, yeah, he's this really fast guy out of the Big 12. Hey, your job as a general manager is to be better than me at this, and that's where it started to really lose me. Where we have all this capital. Oh, we're getting this with it. Oh, we don't think this is the right quarterback, and we didn't think Carson Wentz was the right quarterback for this guy, but we're going to draft Deshaun Kaiser in the second round. Well, wait a second. I thought that the draft capital was so valuable, that the second round picks were so valuable. You're a genius for getting Brock Osweiler and getting a second round pick. Why are you picking this particular guy? Is he part of the future or isn't he? And like all these questions started to come in and say, and that's why I would remember the adage, it's the lottery, it's bites from the apple and things like that. Is that the mentality you're operating with? It can't be. It shouldn't be. It should be. We've got these resources. If they are that precious, let's find our way to use them the best way. And some of that can be analytics, making sure you're using the analytics in the best way possible to try and turn around and draft these guys that are the best possible guys. And that's the flip side. I think this is the case with Coleman, knowing the limitations of your analytics and not necessarily getting a guy who's got red flags, which I think is something that happened in a couple of the cases.
So I think what analytics shows us is the limitations of our scouting and that we don't draft as well as we think we do. That when we trade up for Mark Ingram and the Patriots steal 2 first-round picks from us, that's a bad deal for us, And maybe every once in a while we'll trade away a second-round pick for a current third, a future second for a current third, and draft Alvin Kamara. But that doesn't prove that was a good decision. It proves that you got a good player and you nailed that draft pick. It doesn't, in the process, when we look at all across of years and years of people doing this, we see that most of the time it's a bad idea. And there's got to be something to be said for that in terms of, what we're doing here as analysts.
What's the bad idea? Trading up?
Trading up is, especially if you're giving a current third round pick for a future second round pick, that sort of thing. Those are kind of patently bad moves, I think.
Right. You can anecdotally think of trading up in cases where it really worked. Right. But you forget anecdotally all the places where it really didn't.
Except when it made the Cowboys.
Nobody forgets that one.
Well, they started by trading a guy for 1 million picks and things like that.
Yeah.
But again, is that categorical situationally? So you're a team that's hanging around 10-6, and you got to move up into the teens and get that guy that you think is there. I mean, that's my problem with this. If it becomes categorical, I get very, very nervous, because then that's how we start giving awards to the team. Oh, look, you traded down for the team that went up into the teens, got an extra player, and used it to make the playoffs, make a deep playoff.
Right. I get what you're saying, and that has to do with where you're at in your cycle. So speaking of cycles, I think we're getting a little bit laundry-ish right now. Anyway, we got to wrap it up, but it's been awesome talking to you guys. Always fascinating and always awesome having you on, Mike. Like we said at the beginning, you're plugging Bleacher Report. Where can the people find you on Twitter, releasing all of your March Madness?
You can find me at Mike Tanier, at Mike, T-A-N, as in Nancy, I-E-R. And, of course, you can download the Bleacher Report app. We're telling you to do that all through March Madness, of course. You're watching the games. Follow it on the Bleacher Report app. And you can follow me, Mike Freeman, Matt Miller, Ty Dunn, your favorite NFL writers, your favorite baseball, basketball, college basketball writers, teams as well. It's free. It's a great app. totally customizable to your experience, and get it, and follow me on it, please.
Awesome. Aaron, what can we find on Football Outsiders going on right now?
Right now, we've got futures on Ed Oliver, who Derek Klassen thinks is worth the number one pick.
Even I love him.
Played out of position at the University of Houston.
Oh, it's a zero technique, yeah.
And coming up soon, we'll have our Q-Base quarterback projections on ESPN. I wrote that up this week. Our Playmaker Score wide receiver projections. And most importantly, me going on vacation for a week, which I badly need. So I will sign off and talk to everybody a couple weeks from now.
Your voice is definitely proof right there that you need a
vacation.
All right. Well, as usual, please, everybody check out the SIS Football Rookie Handbook. It is available at Amazon.com and at actasports.com. You can always catch us on Twitter at sportsinfo_SIS. Thanks, guys. We'll talk later.